Caleb Moore's dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. as his 18-wheeler rumbled across Harrison Bridge. The temperature gauge outside showed -5 degrees Celsius, and the radio crackled with weather warnings about the unexpected Sunday night snowfall. At 42, Caleb had driven enough overnight hauls to know when roads turned dangerous. This was one of those nights. 20 years as a cross-country trucker had etched permanent lines into his weathered face. Before trucks, he had been a military mechanic, not the kind who saw combat, just the kind who made sure others could. The kind who lived by a simple code that followed him into civilian life: help when you can. Headlights swept across the underside of the bridge as Caleb descended toward the valley. That is when he spotted it, a sedan with hazard lights blinking weakly, hood raised like a surrender flag. Beside it, a woman hunched over two small figures, desperately wrapping her own coat around them. Cars passed by, their tail lights vanishing into the distance. No one stopped. Caleb checked his side mirrors and began calculating. He was already running behind schedule. His delivery window was tight. Company policy discouraged unscheduled stops. The logical choice was clear. He downshifted anyway. The massive truck growled in protest as he maneuvered onto the narrow shoulder, emergency lights casting orange pulses across the snowy roadside. The woman looked up, surprise and weariness crossing her face as Caleb's door swung open. "Engine trouble," he called down, his breath clouding in the freezing air. The woman nodded, clutching the children tighter. One looked about 6, the other maybe 4. Both had stopped crying but wore the haunted expression of exhausted fear. "Hop in," Caleb said, gesturing to his cabin. "Heater works." The woman hesitated. We do not have money for a tow." Caleb's laugh formed another cloud. "I have got diesel, that is enough." The cabin was cramped with 4 people, but warmth trumped comfort. 8 miles down the road, Caleb pulled into an all-night service station. Without fanfare, he bought 3 hot chocolates and sandwiches, placing them on the table before the grateful family. As they prepared to leave, the station attendant had called a relative to pick them up. Caleb reached into his sleeper berth and pulled out a worn wool blanket. "Take it," he said, pressing it into the mother's hands. When she tried to refuse, "I do not need it tonight," he said. He asked no names, requested no thanks. Minutes later, his truck disappeared into the snowy night, red tail lights fading like embers in a world racing forward with cold indifference. Some still choose to stop. They never realize they will be remembered forever by those whose names they never asked. Elena Ramirez watched the truck's tail lights vanish into the darkness, the wool blanket still warm in her hands. 2 months ago, she would have been suspicious of such kindness. 2 months ago, her husband had still been alive. Staff Sergeant Michael Ramirez had not died in a blaze of glory. No dramatic last stand. No heroic sacrifice captured on camera. Just a routine patrol, an undetected IED, and a phone call that collapsed her world at 3 a.m. Now Elena navigated a different kind of battlefield, raising 2 children alone while fighting bureaucratic systems that seemed designed to exhaust rather than assist. Tonight had been especially important. On what would have been Michael's 34th birthday, Elena had promised the children they would visit his favorite fishing spot to release paper lanterns in his memory. But first, she needed to meet with the military benefits attorney in Morton County, a meeting she had now missed. When her aging sedan sputtered to a stop beneath Harrison Bridge, with her phone battery dead and both children shivering in the back seat, she had resigned herself to spending the night in the car. Then the truck had appeared like an apparition, its driver asking nothing in return for his help. The next morning, Elena's brother-in-law drove them back to North Point Marine Base, where they had been living since Michael's death. As they passed through security, Lieutenant Stephanie Wilson, Steph, flagged them down. "Missed you at the meeting yesterday," she said, leaning into the car window. "Everything okay?" Elena sighed. "Car broke down. We would still be stranded if not for some truck driver who stopped to help." Something in her tone made Steph's eyebrows rise. "Random trucker stopped on Harrison Bridge in that snowstorm. Gave us his blanket too." Elena's 6-year-old son piped up from the back seat, clutching the worn wool like a treasure. Later that afternoon in Steph's office, Elena elaborated. Steph, who worked as personnel liaison to Colonel Whitmore, the base commander, listened intently, occasionally making notes. "Did you get his name?" she asked. Elena shook her head. "Just Caleb, saw it." On his thermos, Steph nodded thoughtfully. Mind if I see the blanket? The wool blanket was standard military issue, though faded with age. In one corner, barely visible, were stenciled initials Caleb Moore. Mind if I look into this? Steph asked. Elena shrugged. Why? He just helped us out. Because, Steph said carefully, the colonel knew your husband well. He would want to know someone looked out for Michael's family. That evening, security camera footage from the service station revealed the truck's company logo and number. One call to the dispatcher confirmed the driver's identity. Caleb Moore, former military mechanic, now senior driver for interstate freight lines. Within hours, the story and footage circulated through an internal Marine message board. On or outside uniform, civilian helps fallen Marines family. Comments poured in from active duty Marines and veterans alike. This is why we serve. Someone find this guy and buy him a beer. Reminds me why I wear the uniform. Colonel Whitmore viewed the footage in silence. Then he picked up his phone. Get me 5 volunteers from Baker Company and find out where Mr. Moore lives. Meanwhile, Caleb returned home after his delivery run, oblivious to the ripples his simple act had created. He washed his truck, heated a frozen dinner, and settled into his recliner to watch the evening news. Tomorrow would bring another route, another deadline, another anonymous stretch of American highway. Some people save others with one small action. Sometimes that action resonates across an entire community. Do you believe kindness ever goes unnoticed for long? The sharp crack of diesel engines jerked Caleb awake from his half-doze in front of the television. Morning light filtered through his blinds as he shuffled to the window, coffee cup in hand. What he saw made him freeze mid-sip. 3 military jeeps idled at his curb, their distinctive olive drab unmistakable against the snow-covered street. 6 Marines in dress uniforms emerged, moving with the synchronized precision that civilian life never quite instills. One carried a polished wooden box. Another held what appeared to be a framed certificate. A knock at the door completed Caleb's confusion. He opened it to find himself face-to-face with a tall officer whose silver eagles marked him as a full colonel. Mr. Caleb Moore, the colonel asked, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. Caleb nodded dumbly, suddenly conscious of his rumpled T-shirt and sweatpants. Colonel James Whitmore, United States Marine Corps, the officer introduced himself with crisp formality. May we come in? In his small living room, the Marine stood at parade rest while Colonel Whitmore explained the purpose of their visit. Yesterday evening, you assisted a woman and 2 children stranded beneath Harrison Bridge, he stated rather than asked. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Just gave them a ride to the gas station. Anyone would have. Except no one did, Whitmore countered. And what you could not have known is that the woman you helped was Elena Ramirez, widow of Staff Sergeant Michael Ramirez. The name meant nothing to Caleb, and his expression said as much. Staff Sergeant Ramirez served under my command in Fallujah, Whitmore continued. During an ambush, he pulled me from a burning vehicle, suffering 3rd-degree burns in the process. The colonel's voice remained steady, but something flickered behind his eyes. He saved my life and the lives of 3 other Marines. 2 months ago, we lost him to an IED. Caleb swallowed hard. I did not know. That is what makes your actions so significant, Whitmore said. You had no idea who they were. You simply saw someone who needed help. One of the younger Marines stepped forward, opening the wooden box he carried. Inside lay a medallion on a blue ribbon. The Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest honor the Marine Corps can bestow upon a civilian. This is not standard procedure, Whitmore admitted. But sometimes standard procedure fails to capture what matters most. Another Marine presented the framed certificate. Engraved in elegant script were the words, "Kindness needs no uniform." Caleb stared at the unexpected honors, completely at a loss for words. Finally, he managed to ask, "How did you even find me?" A hint of a smile touched Whitmore's face. "We are Marines, Mr. Moore. Finding things is what we do." The youngest Marine present, barely old enough to buy a beer, suddenly stepped forward. "Sir," he addressed Caleb with the same respect he would give a senior officer. "What you did, it is why I enlisted, to protect people who act like you do." Before Caleb could respond, all 6 Marines snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute, the highest sign of respect from one serviceman to another. News of the unusual ceremony spread quickly. Security camera footage from the service station, released with Elena's permission, went viral alongside photos of the Marines at Caleb's home. Within 48 hours, The story had been shared tens of thousands of times, with countless comments from both civilians and military personnel. This is the America I fight for. No cape, no badge, no uniform, just humanity at its finest. Who is cutting onions in here? Television stations called, radio hosts requested interviews. A major trucking magazine wanted him for their cover story. Caleb declined them all, uncomfortable with the attention. When pressed by a persistent reporter who caught him at a truck stop, he simply shrugged and said, "I just did what was right. Do not need to talk about it." That evening, he carefully placed the medallion and certificate in his bedroom drawer rather than displaying them. The next morning, he climbed back into his truck cab, logged his starting mileage, and pulled onto the highway as he had done thousands of times before. The only difference, a new wool blanket now lay folded in his sleeper berth, ready for the next time someone might need it. When honor is not about rank or uniform, but simple right action, that is the most noble uniform of all. If you believe kindness still lives in everyday moments, type honor. Life continued much as before for Caleb Moore. Same roads, same truck stops, same solitary meals in roadside diners. Yet subtle changes rippled through his days like markers on an invisible map. At a fuel station in Nebraska, a fellow trucker silently paid for his coffee. In Illinois, a warehouse manager glanced at his company ID, then shook his hand with unexpected reverence. Outside Pittsburgh, a state trooper who pulled him over for a routine inspection recognized his name and simply said, "My brother is a Marine. Thanks for what you did," before waving him on without further delay. Fame proved mercifully transient, but respect had deeper roots. 1 week after the Marine's visit, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. "Mr. Moore, my son keeps asking when we will see the kind truck man again. I told him when we are lucky enough a second time. The blanket you gave us now wraps around them for bedtime stories. I tell them it is magical. It carries the warmth of good people doing right things when no one is watching. Thank you for proving me right when I needed it most. Elena Ramirez." Caleb folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the medallion in his drawer. Not for display, just for remembering. In his garage that weekend, he mounted the certificate on an unfinished pine board. Not prominently, just where he could see it while working on his truck's engine or changing the oil. A private reminder rather than a public boast. The following Sunday, his route took him past the same service station where he had bought sandwiches for Elena and her children. As he filled his thermos with coffee, the attendant caught his eye, flashed a subtle nod of recognition, and waved away his payment. Neither man spoke of it, but in that silent exchange lay an understanding. Sometimes heroism is not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it is just about hitting the brakes at the right moment. "I used to think the world was as harsh as that night road," Caleb would later say. "Now I am not so sure." Caleb's story is not about wonders, it is a reminder. A moment of stopping can create a legacy of being remembered. People like him do not need spotlights or medals. They need us to tell their stories, to remind the world they existed. When I first heard about Caleb Moore, I wondered how many times I had passed someone in need, too busy with my own path to notice theirs. How many opportunities for bonding vanish in our mirrors daily. The medal the Marines gave him was not really for stopping to help. It was for showing us all what we could be if we just paused long enough to see each other. Elena's children still have that blanket. It is faded now, patched in places, but they refuse to replace it. To them, it represents a simple truth. Even on the coldest nights, warmth can come from unseen places. Colonel Whitmore incorporated the story into Marine training sessions about the core values of honor, courage, and commitment. These are not just military virtues, he tells new recruits. They are human ones. Sometimes it takes a civilian to remind us what we are fighting for. As for Caleb, he is still driving those long hauls, still stopping when needed, still carrying a spare blanket. He does not consider himself special, just someone who did what anyone should do. And maybe that is the most powerful part of his story. Heroism is not reserved for battlefields or burning buildings. Sometimes it waits beneath ordinary bridges on snowy nights in the simple decision to stop when everyone else passes by. In a world that celebrates the exceptional, perhaps we should also honor the power of simple decency. The kind that expects no recognition, no reward, just the quiet knowledge of having done what is right. The mother clutched her children as they walked along the icy highway. A car sped past. The driver rolled down the window and yelled, "Move aside." The truck behind slammed the brakes. The driver stepped out without saying a word. The next morning, 3 military vehicles blocked the street where he lived. Who sent them and for what reason?